The sound hit me before anything else did. A low, insistent thud like the pulse of some restless machine seeping through the walls of our apartment, steady and unyielding. I just stepped inside, the door groaning shut behind me, my keys clattering against the silence as I fumbled them into my pocket. The air hung heavy, thick with a weight I couldn't place, pressing against my chest. I stood there, rooted in the half-light of the entryway, my coat slipping off one shoulder, listening. It wasn't the hum of the refrigerator, not the drone of the TV left on by mistake. It was something alive, something moving, deliberate. And then came her laugh, Claire's laugh, sharp and crystalline, slicing through the thudding like a sudden crack in ice. My stomach lurched. Not because it was strange, but because it was so familiar, too familiar, vibrant in a way I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. I'm Daniel. 38, an architect by trade, a man who spends his days tracing lines on blueprints, building structures that hold steady while my own life, it seems, has been quietly crumbling. Claire's my wife, 5 years married, 10 years woven together through late-night talks, shared coffees, and promises we used to mean. She's a graphic designer, all bold strokes and brighter smiles, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make it feel alive. Or she was, once. Lately, our apartment has felt like one of my unfinished sketches, half-formed, edges blurring, the details fading into something I couldn't quite grasp. We'd been drifting, sure. I chalked it up to time, to the slow erosion of routine, work, bills, the way two people stop looking at each other when the days stack too high. I never thought it was something more. Someone else. That night, though, the air was different. I'd come home early, unplanned, a client meeting scrubbed last minute, and the apartment wasn't supposed to feel like this. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the hardwood, the kitchen untouched, no clink of dishes, no faint glow from her laptop screen where she'd be hunched over a project. Just that thudding, relentless, vibrating through the floorboards, and her laugh ringing out again, bright and unguarded, from somewhere deeper inside. I let my bag slip to the floor, the thud of it swallowed by the rhythm pulsing through the walls. My coat hung limp in my hand as I took a step forward, then another, my breath shallow, catching on something I couldn't name yet. Her gym bag caught my eye next, neon yellow straps stark against the dark leather of the couch, slung there like an afterthought. She'd been going to the gym a lot these past few months, 3, maybe 4 nights a week. Said it was her escape, a way to shake off the stress of deadlines and clients who never knew what they wanted. I believed her, nodded along, even felt a flicker of pride that she was taking care of herself. Why wouldn't I? She'd come home flushed and tired, hair damp from a shower, talking about spin classes or some new weight routine. I'd listen, half distracted, sketching in my head while she spoke. But now, staring at that bag, its zipper half open, a water bottle peeking out, the story didn't feel so simple. The thudding grew louder as I moved toward the hallway, our hallway, lined with framed photos of us grinning in places we'd long since stopped visiting. Cape Cod, that summer we rented a cottage and burned every meal. Paris, her hair wild in the wind by the Seine. The glass gleamed dully in the low light, their edges accusing, watching me shuffle past. My chest tightened, not fear yet, not quite, but a slow, grinding dread, like gears locking into place. I could have called out, could have broken the spell with a shout, "Claire, you hear?" and let her voice pull me back to safety. But I didn't. My throat felt dry, my tongue heavy. I just kept walking, each step deliberate, the sound drawing me closer to something I hadn't asked for, something I wasn't sure I could face. The bedroom door stood ajar, not wide, just a crack enough for a thin ribbon of light to spill into the hall, flickering like a candle caught in a draft. My hand hovered over the knob, trembling, the cool metal brushing my fingertips. That's when I heard her again, her voice softer now, a murmur, words too low to catch, threaded with a warmth I hadn't felt from her in ages. And then the shadow, broad, unfamiliar, slid across the wall inside, moving with the thudding, sinking with it like a dance I wasn't part of. My breath hitched, sharp and sudden. I didn't push the door open. I didn't need to, not yet. The gym bag, the laugh, the rhythm, it all snapped together, a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall, the photos rattling faintly in their frames. The apartment tilted for a moment, our home, our life, and I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying myself, the air tasting bitter, stale. My mind raced, clawing for an explanation that didn't cut so deep. Maybe it was a friend, a neighbor, someone dropping by. But the shadow wasn't hers alone, and that laugh, it wasn't for me. I saw the gym in my head then, not the machines or the mirrored walls, but her there, glowing, alive, with someone else. Someone who wasn't me. And in that quiet, shattering moment, standing alone in the hallway we'd painted together, I knew. Claire had brought something home, or someone, and the life I'd built around her was already slipping through my fingers. The hallway felt smaller then, the walls pressing in as that shadow shifted beyond the bedroom door, a silhouette I didn't know, broad and solid, moving with a confidence that didn't belong here. My hand lingered near the knob, fingers twitching, the cold metal grounding me for a fleeting second. I could have walked away, retreated to the kitchen, poured a drink, pretended the thudding was just the building settling. But my feet wouldn't move backward, only forward, pulled by a thread of certainty I didn't want to pull. Claire's voice hummed again, low and intimate, a sound that used to be mine, now tangled with someone else's presence. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the rhythm from the room, and I pushed the door, just enough. The light spilled wider, soft and golden, catching the edge of the bed, our bed, the one we'd bought together at that overpriced store downtown, laughing about how we'd never afford the matching nightstands. She was there, perched on the mattress, her back to me, hair loose and spilling over her shoulders, still damp from a shower. Her gym clothes were on, a tight black tank top, leggings that hugged her legs, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself this was normal, that she'd just gotten home, that I'd misread everything. But then he moved into view. Tall, muscled, his frame filling the space like he owned it. His hair was dark, cropped short, sweat still clinging to his neck. A gym towel hung over his shoulder, casual, like he'd strolled in straight from a workout. His voice rumbled deep, easy, saying something about reps or sets, words I couldn't focus on because my eyes locked on his hand, resting on her knee. Her knee. Claire's knee. The one I'd kissed 1,000 times after she'd tripped on a hike, when she'd cried about a deadline, when we'd sprawled on the same bed planning a future that felt unbreakable. His hand was there now, thumb brushing idly against her skin, and she didn't pull away. She leaned into it, her head tilting, that laugh bubbling up again, soft, private, a sound meant for him. My throat closed up, a fist of air lodged there, choking me. I stepped back, the door creaking faintly, but they didn't hear. They were too wrapped in whatever this was, too lost in a world I'd never been invited to. I turned, my legs unsteady, and stumbled down the hall, the photos blurring past me like smears of paint, us at the beach, us at her sister's wedding, us before the gym became her second home. My mind clawed for footing. Who was he? Some trainer, some guy she'd met lifting weights while I was sketching floor plans? I saw it then, the gym, that sleek, mirrored place she'd started going to last fall. She'd come home glowing, talking about how strong she felt, how alive. I'd smiled, nodded, thought it was good for her. Good for us. But now I saw her there, really saw her, standing too close to him, his hands adjusting her form, their eyes catching in the mirrors. Not just exercise. Not just stress relief. Something else, something that had followed her home, into our bed, into my life. The living room stretched out dark and empty as I reached it, the gym bag still there, mocking me with its neon straps. I sank onto the couch, my hands gripping my knees, breath ragged. The thudding had stopped, or maybe I just couldn't hear it anymore over the roar in my head. I wanted to storm back, fling the door wide, demand answers, but my body wouldn't move. Instead, I sat there, staring at the bag, piecing it together. She'd been late a lot lately, classes running long, she'd said. Extra sessions. I'd never questioned it, never thought to. But the towel, the sweat, his ease in our bedroom, it wasn't a one-time thing. This had roots, deep ones, tangled beneath the surface of every excuse she'd fed me. His name came to me then, not from her lips, but from a memory. Jake. She'd mentioned him once, months ago, casual as anything, her trainer, the one who'd gotten her into deadlifts, who'd made her laugh about protein shakes. I'd pictured some faceless gym rat, not him standing in my home, touching my wife like it was his right. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms, the sting sharp enough to keep me from breaking something. I wasn't cruel, wasn't the type to hurt anyone. I'd spent my life building things, not tearing them down. But in that moment, I felt it, a rage I didn't recognize, hot and jagged, slicing through the man I thought I was. I heard the bedroom door open fully then, footsteps, 2 sets, moving toward the hall. Her voice, brighter now, saying something about water. His, low and amused, agreeing. They were coming this way, carefree, like I wasn't even here. I stood, my shadow stretching across the floor, my heart a drumbeat of its own. I didn't know what I'd say, didn't know what I'd do. But I knew one thing, whatever this was, it ended tonight. The lie she'd built, the life I'd trusted, it was over. And as their shadows loomed closer, I braced myself for the wreck that was coming. Their shadows stretched into the living room first, hers, slim and familiar, his, broad and intrusive, spilling across the hardwood like a stain I couldn't scrub out. I stood there, rooted by the couch, my breath shallow, the air electric with something sharp and unnameable. Claire stepped in, her hair still loose, a glass of water in her hand. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening, not guilt, not yet, just surprise, like I'd caught her off guard in some innocent game. Jake lingered behind her, towel still slung over his shoulder, his stance loose, too comfortable. My fists tightened at my sides, the heat climbing up my neck, a pulse pounding behind my eyes. Daniel, she said, her voice pitching up, too bright, too quick. You're home early. It wasn't a question, just a statement, a flimsy shield thrown up before the inevitable. I didn't answer, couldn't, my gaze flicking from her to him, then back again. The gym bag sat between us, a silent witness, its neon straps glowing faintly in the dim light. Jake shifted, scratching the back of his neck, his lips twitching like he might smile, like this was nothing, like he hadn't just walked out of my bedroom with my wife. What's he doing here? My voice came out low, rough, scraping against the quiet. I didn't look at him, couldn't, just locked eyes with Claire, searching for something, anything, that wasn't a lie. She blinked, her mouth opening, then closing, the glass trembling slightly in her grip. She set it down on the coffee table, slow, deliberate, buying time. Jake was just dropping off some workout plans, she said, the words tumbling out too fast, too thin. We were going over them. In there. She gestured vaguely toward the hall, like that explained the shadows, the laugh, his hand on her knee. Workout plans. I repeated it, flat, the absurdity of it burning in my chest. My laugh came out sharp, bitter, cutting through the room. In our bedroom. At 9 o'clock at night. My voice rose, cracking on the edges, the rage spilling over now, unstoppable. I took a step forward, the floor creaking under me, and she flinched, just a little, but enough to fuel the fire. Don't lie to me, Claire. Not now. Not after I stopped, the image flashing again, his hand, her ease, the way she'd leaned into him like I didn't exist. My throat tightened, words choking there, but I forced them out. How long? She shook her head, hands lifting, palms out like she could push the question away. It's not what you think, Dan. You're blowing this out of proportion. Her tone shifted, defensive, a hint of irritation creeping in, like I was the one out of line. Jake cleared his throat, stepping forward, his voice calm, too damn calm. Look, man, I didn't mean to, that's when I lost it. My hand, not at him, not at her, just to the side, snatching the glass she'd set down. I hurled it against the wall, the shatter exploding through the room, water streaking down the paint, shards glittering on the floor. Claire stepping back, her eyes wide now, real fear flickering there. Jake tensed, but he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched, like he was sizing me up. Don't, I snapped, my voice a growl, pointing at him, then swinging back to her. Don't stand there and tell me I'm wrong when I saw you. Both of you. My chest heaved, the air thick, suffocating. How long, Claire? Weeks? Months? How many times have you brought him here, into our home? She stared at me, her mouth trembling, and for a second, I thought she'd break, tell me the truth, let it spill out raw and ugly. But then her face hardened, defiance flashing in her eyes. It's not like that, she said, quieter now, but firm. You've been gone, Daniel. Not physically, but gone. I needed someone who saw me. Jake listens. He gets me. I staggered back, her words a punch I didn't see coming. Listens. Gets her. Like I was some ghost haunting this apartment, not her husband, not the man who'd built a life with her. And I don't? My voice cracked, softer now, the anger bleeding into something raw, something that hurt more. 10 years, Claire. 10 years, and I don't get you? She looked away, her jaw tight, silence stretching between us, heavy and final. Jake shifted again, muttering something about leaving, but I barely heard him. My eyes stayed on her, her profile, the curve of her cheek, the woman I thought I knew, watching her slip further out of reach. You should go, I said, not to her, but to him, my voice steady now, cold. He nodded, grabbing his towel, his steps quick as he headed for the door. It clicked shut behind him, leaving us alone in the wreckage, glass on the floor, water dripping, the air humming with everything unsaid. Claire crossed her arms, her gaze dropping to the mess, then back to me. I didn't mean for this, she whispered, almost too soft to hear. It just happened. I laughed again, hollow this time, the sound bouncing off the walls. It doesn't just happen, I said, turning away, my hands shaking. You chose it. You chose him. I walked to the window, staring out at the city lights, their blur matching the chaos in my head. She didn't follow, didn't speak, just stood there, a shadow of the woman I'd loved. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but the pieces were falling, sharp and jagged, and I wasn't sure I could pick them up. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The apartment felt hollow after Jake left, like the air had been sucked out, leaving nothing but echoes and broken glass. Claire stood by the coffee table, arms still crossed, her silence louder than any excuse she'd thrown at me. I didn't look at her, couldn't, my eyes fixed on the city lights beyond the window, their cold glow steadying me while my mind churned. She'd chosen this, she'd said. Chosen him. The words looped in my head, sharp and relentless, cutting deeper each time. I wasn't a bad man, never had been. I built things, fixed things, not tore them apart. But standing there, the sting of her betrayal pulsing through me, I felt something new, a need to do something back, to make her feel even a fraction of what she'd done to me. I turned from the window, my steps slow, deliberate, the crunch of glass under my shoes the only sound between us. She watched me, wary now, her eyes flickering with something like regret, or maybe just fear of what I'd do next. I didn't shout, didn't throw anything else. Instead, I walked past her, down the hall, into the bedroom, their room, now, in my mind, and stopped at her desk. Her sacred space, cluttered with sketchpads, pens, her laptop humming faintly. Her art was her soul, she'd always said, her escape, her pride. I'd spent years admiring it, framing her prints, telling her she could go bigger, chase galleries. Now, it felt like a weapon I could turn back on her. I opened her laptop, the screen flaring to life, her latest project glowing there, a sleek poster for some fitness brand, all bold lines and sweat-glossed bodies. Fitting, I thought, my lip curling. I clicked through her files, months of work, designs she'd poured herself into, and dragged them to the trash. Not all of them, not enough to ruin her completely, just enough to hurt. Enough to remind her I could take something too. The delete sound chimed, crisp and final, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction, dark and unfamiliar, settle in my chest. She'd notice later, tomorrow, maybe, and she'd know it was me. No explanation, no confrontation. But that wasn't enough. I needed more, not chaos, but something she'd carry, something that lingered. I left the bedroom, brushing past her again, she hadn't moved, just stood there, a statue of guilt, and went to the kitchen. Her gym schedule was pinned to the fridge, scribbled in her looping handwriting, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 p.m. with Jake. I pulled it down, crumpled it in my fist, and grabbed a marker from the counter. In its place, I wrote a single word, cancelled, bold and black, the ink bleeding into the paper. Then I took her gym bag, still slumped by the couch, and emptied it onto the floor, water bottle, towel, spare socks spilling out like secrets she couldn't hide anymore. I shoved it into the closet, out of sight, and locked the door, pocketing the key. Small moves, petty maybe, but they felt like reclaiming something, carving a line she couldn't cross. She finally spoke then, her voice soft, unsteady. What are you doing, Dan? I didn't answer, just kept moving, my hands steady now, my mind clear. I went to the living room shelf, where her collection of trinkets sat, little things she'd picked up over the years, tokens of a life she'd woven with me. A glass bird from a trip to Vermont, a carved box from her mom's estate. I took the bird, her favorite, the one she'd cradled like it was alive, and set it on the coffee table, right where the glass had been. Then I grabbed a book from the shelf, thick and heavy, and dropped it, not hard, just enough. The bird shattered, delicate wings splintering across the wood. She gasped, a small, broken sound, and I felt it, her flinch, her loss, like a mirror to mine. "Stop it," she said, sharper now, stepping toward me, her hands reaching like she could undo it. I turned, meeting her eyes for the first time, and saw the crack in her armor, tears welling, her face pale. "You don't get to do this," she whispered, voice trembling. "You don't get to break things because you're mad." I laughed, low and cold, the sound foreign in my throat. "You broke us," I said, my words steady. "You don't get to tell me what I can't do." She flinched again, harder this time, and I saw it, the weight of it landing, the realization sinking in. Not just guilt now, but something deeper, something she couldn't shrug off. I didn't stay to watch it settle. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and walked to the door, the apartment closing in behind me. The air outside hit me hard, crisp, unforgiving, clearing the fog from my head. I'd hurt her, not with fists, not with screams, but with precision, with the things she loved. It wasn't enough to erase what she'd done, wasn't enough to mend the hole she'd torn through me. But it was a start, a way to even the ground, to take back a piece of myself she tried to give away. As I stepped into the night, the city humming around me, I wondered how long it'd take her to notice the files, the schedule, the bird, how long it'd take her to feel the quiet sting of losing something she couldn't replace. The city swallowed me that night, its lights blurring into streaks as I wandered aimless, restless, the cold biting at my knuckles where they gripped my coat. I didn't go far, just a few blocks, circling back to the park near our building, the one we used to walk through hand in hand, laughing about nothing. Now, the benches sat empty, the trees bare, their branches clawing at the sky. I sank onto one, the wood damp against my jeans, and let the silence settle over me. My breath fogged in the air, slow and uneven, each exhale carrying a piece of the rage I'd unleashed on her, on the apartment, on the life we'd built. It was gone now, that heat, leaving something softer in its wake, something heavy, like a stone lodged in my chest. I thought about her face, the way it crumpled when the bird shattered, the tears she didn't let fall. I'd wanted that, hadn't I? But sitting there, alone under the streetlights, it didn't feel like victory. It felt empty, hollow, like I'd broken something in myself too. Claire wasn't the woman I'd married anymore, not the one who'd doodled on my blueprints or danced with me in the kitchen. She was a stranger now, someone who'd found a piece of herself with Jake, a piece I hadn't known was missing. And me, I was a stranger too, a man who trashed her work, smashed her treasures, walked out into the night without a word. Who was I without her? The question gnawed at me, quiet and persistent, as the hours slipped by. Dawn crept in, eventually gray, muted, painting the park in shades of ash. My phone buzzed once, twice, her name flashing on the screen. I didn't answer, couldn't, not yet. But I knew I had to go back, had to face her one last time, not to fight, not to hurt, but to find an end. My legs ached as I climbed the stairs to our floor, each step heavier than the last, the key trembling in my hand as I unlocked the door. The apartment was still, too still, but glass swept up, the gym bag gone from the floor. She'd cleaned, or tried to, but the air held the weight of last night, thick and unyielding. Claire sat on the couch, knees drawn up, her eyes red-rimmed, staring at the spot where the bird had been. She didn't look up as I stepped in, just waited, her silence pulling me closer. I stopped by the window, the city waking beyond the glass, and let the words come as slow, unsteady, but mine. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice low, frayed at the edges. "Not with you. Not like this." She shifted then, her head lifting, her gaze meeting mine, searching, maybe, for the man she'd known before. "Dan," she started, but I raised a hand, gentle, stopping her. I didn't want excuses, didn't need them. "You chose him," I said, the truth settling between us, heavy but clear. "Maybe you didn't mean to, maybe it just happened, but you did. And I can't unsee that. I can't live with it." My throat tightened, the sadness welling up now, soft and deep, washing over the anger like rain on embers. She nodded, just once, small, her lips pressing tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and I believed her, not because it fixed anything, but because it was all she had left to give. I crossed the room, sat on the chair opposite her, the space between us a chasm now, not a bridge. "I deleted your files," I said, the confession slipping out, quiet, unadorned. "The bird, the schedule, I wanted you to hurt. Like I did. Her eyes flickered, a shadow of pain crossing them, but she didn't flinch, didn't fight. I know, she said, softer still. I deserved it. And there it was, no venom, no blame, just the truth, raw and mutual, binding us in its ache. I leaned back, exhaling, the stone in my chest shifting, not gone, but lighter, bearable. I'm leaving, I said, the decision forming as I spoke it, solidifying in the air. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. We're done, Claire. I need to start over. She didn't argue, didn't plead, just looked at me, her face a map of regret, of things we couldn't take back. Where will you go? She asked, her voice breaking on the edges. I shrugged, the future a blank page, unsketched. Somewhere new, I said. Somewhere I can breathe again. She nodded again, tears spilling now, silent and slow, and I felt them too, mine, hers, mingling in the quiet, a goodbye neither of us had planned. I stood, my shadow falling over her, and for a moment I saw us years ago, tangled in love, in hope, before the gym, before Jake, before the cracks. But that was gone, a memory fading into the gray. I walked to the door, pausing there, my hand on the frame. Take care of yourself, I said, not turning back, not needing to. The words hung there, soft, final, as I stepped out, the hallway stretching ahead, empty but open. The sadness stayed with me, but so did something else, something small, fragile, like the first line of a new design, waiting to be drawn. The days after that last talk stretched long and strange, time bending around me, soft and elastic, as I moved through the apartment like a guest in my own life. Claire stayed out of my way, her presence a whisper, keys jingling as she left for work, the faint hum of her shower cutting through the quiet. We didn't fight, didn't speak, just drifted past each other, two shadows untethered, waiting for the end. I packed slowly, deliberately, books first, then clothes, the blueprints I'd sketched late at night when she'd slept beside me. Each box felt like a line drawn, a piece of me sealed away, ready to carry somewhere new. The city outside buzzed on, indifferent, its rhythm steady while mine faltered, then found its footing. I left on a Thursday, gray, unremarkable, the movers hauling my things to a truck bound for a small place upstate, a cabin I'd found online, all wooden windows, perched by a lake I'd never seen. Claire stood in the doorway as I grabbed the last box, her eyes tired, her hands tucked into her sleeves. Good luck, Dan, she said, her voice thin, a thread of something, sorrow, maybe, or relief, woven through it. I nodded, not trusting my own words, and stepped into the hall, the door clicking shut behind me, soft but final. The sound echoed in my chest, not a wound anymore, but a marker, a point where one life stopped and another began. The drive north was quiet, hours of highway stretching out, the skyline shrinking in my rearview, replaced by trees, then hills, then water glinting under a pale sun. I settled into the cabin that night, the air crisp, the silence vast, nothing like the city's hum, nothing like the thudding that had unraveled everything. I sat by the lake, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands, and let my mind wander back to that night, the shadow on the wall, her laugh, his hand. The shock had been as strong, cutting clean through me. Anger followed, hot and wild, driving me to smash her bird, erase her files, bury her gym bag. I'd wanted her to hurt, to mirror my pain, and I'd seen it in her eyes, felt it in her silence. But now, miles away, the memory of it felt distant, like a storm I'd weathered, not a fire still burning. What had I learned? I turned the question over, slow and careful, the lake rippling in front of me, its surface catching the last light. Trust, maybe, how fragile it was, how easily it splintered under secrets. Or love, not the fairy tale kind, but the real thing, messy and flawed, capable of fading when you stopped looking at it. Claire hadn't just cheated with Jake, she'd cheated us, the us we'd been, trading it for something shinier, something that didn't include me. And me, I'd held on too long, sketching a life that wasn't there anymore, ignoring the cracks until they swallowed me whole. The revenge, the confrontation, it wasn't about her, not really. It was about me, clawing my way back to myself, proving I could still feel, still act, still choose. I didn't hate her, not anymore. The sadness lingered, sure, a quiet ache in my bones, but it wasn't sharp, wasn't consuming. She'd find her way, maybe with Jake, maybe alone, and I'd find mine. Here, in this cabin, with its bare walls and open sky, I could start over. I'd build again, not just houses, not just plans, but a life simpler, maybe, but mine. I thought about sketching again, not for clients, not for deadlines, but for me lines on paper, shapes taking form, a way to map what came next. The lake stretched out, endless, its edges soft, and I felt it, a spark, small but steady, like the first breath after waking. The sun dipped low, painting the water gold, and I stood, stretching, the mug cold now, forgotten in my hand. What was next? I didn't know, not fully, but that was okay. The cabin was empty, waiting, a frame I could fill. Maybe I'd fish, learn the lake's rhythms, or drive into town, meet faces that didn't know my story. Maybe I'd call old friends, rebuild what I'd let slip. Or maybe I'd just sit here, night after night, letting the quiet teach me what I'd missed in the noise. The betrayal, the wreck of it all, it had stripped me down, left me raw, but it hadn't broken me. It had set me free, free to walk away, to begin again, to find a Daniel I hadn't known was there. I turned back to the cabin, its windows dark, reflecting the fading sky. The box by the door held my pencils, my sketch pads, tools of a trade, tools of a life. I'd unpack them tomorrow, start with a single line, see where it led. The past was done, Claire, Jake, the apartment, the glass on the floor, done. Ahead was something else, something new, and as I stepped inside, the cool air brushing my skin, I felt it, hope, faint but real, carrying me forward.